Buongiorno, sono Massimo Gaggi, editorialista del...
Good morning. My name is Maggi from the Corriere della Sera Daily. We are here at the Festival of Economics in Trento for our second meeting of a cycle that we started yesterday talking about sustainability in businesses. And we will talk about sustainability and finance today, and how finance can participate in this process. And then tomorrow we will have a third appointment, and we will talk about innovation and technology especially. Before introducing to you the people who will address us today, we have a small surprise, and I would like to invite Professor Casarico from the Bocconi University to join me and us here on stage, because we will give awards to young students who participated in the competition for innovative ideas of La Voce Info. And Professor Casari is a member of the board. Innovative ideas for the environment and for development. So I do not know whether they are students from Bocconi. You have the floor, Professor Casarico. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to give this award. La Voce.info last summer actually decided to give an award for and two students, university students, PhD students from Bocconi and also other universities, who make proposals focusing on the public sector as an engine for growth. Since young people oftentimes do not have the opportunity to speak their mind, we decided that we would give an opportunity to them. So many participated, and I would like to thank all of them. The jury included Tito Boeri, Enriquez, and myself, and we selected the proposal by Luigi Boggiana from the Cattolica University Lovagno, Giovanni Righetti from University of Verona. Their proposal is about being aware as citizens and performance indexes of public administration, helping in that respect. Giovanni Righetti is here in Trento, so I would like to ask him to come on stage. And of course, congratulations, Giovanni and Luigi, with your work. Please tell us briefly what your proposal consists of. And then, of course, you can read the details on the website of lavoce.info. Thank you. First and foremost, I would like to thank lavoce.info and the assessment jury for the work, Professors Casari, Boeri, and Enriquez. And I would like also to thank the Festival of Trento for hosting us. Our proposal focuses on transparency in public administration, which is not a goal in itself, but which has to produce positive repercussions. Specifically, we would like to associate and combine each service in public administration dealing with citizens with an indicator of their performance, so that we can give citizens an instrument which they can use to assess in an objective way the policies in the public sector. This would generate an increase in responsibility taking on the part of public administrators, and of course it would have positive repercussions on efficiency. In general, this would also contribute to increasing trust between citizens and public authorities and institutions. Luigi Boggian and I believe that this is at the very basis of economic activity and development. So since we had wanted to talk about development, we decided we would go for this approach, which means a systematic use of performance indicators to assess the services given by public administrations. Thank you very much. And I invite you all to read the details on our website of lavoce.info. Thank you. And now we give the floor to the panel. Thank you for this beautiful initiative. So we talk about finance today. Many people associate the term finance with harsh capitalism. As a matter of fact, in past years, within the context of actions for the environment and sustainability, finance has become something different. We are on the brink of a complete transformation of finance. Data on climate compel investors to reconsider the very foundations of modern finance. This is not my quotation. I'm quoting Levy Fink, who is the head of BlackRock, which I believe is the biggest investment fund in the world, with a portfolio of $7,000 billion, if I'm not mistaken. So I believe that means a GDP of France, Italy, and Spain together. And over a number of years now, the focus has been on this. In their yearly report, they also stated that sustainability is our new investment standard. This is said by this gentleman not because he suddenly became a philanthropist, but because he realized that sustainability is an asset and a value for investors as well in our modern world. Because if you invest in sustainability and if you become more sustainable, then you're less vulnerable to events that you did not foresee, including what is happening now, and we realize that with COVID. So investors are ready to reward these types of investments, also in financial terms. Levy Fink also said that markets anticipate real economy on many instances. So we will see a faster increase in capitals invested in sustainability than actions being taken on the field to fight against climate change. This is true. And the CEO of UBS also said that, but there are others stating that, and BlackRock talks about that also in ethical terms. And as a matter of fact, in the portfolios, these choices have to be mirrored in a consistent way. So, and possibly that is not always the case with Fink's case. Then we need to measure all this. There are different indexes, and rating agencies have created their own indexes. The European Commission assesses, or rather considers all these topics in various ways. A number of days ago, the four bigs in accountability, Deloitte, Siang, and etc., also issued different parameters once again. So it is a fascinating field. It is very interesting. It is new. And we are discussing about this today with four very important interlocutors. We have a speaker who will introduce this, and it is Professor Loriana Pelizzon, sitting on my right. She is a professor of economics at the Ca' Foscari University in Venice. And she also collaborates with the Goethe University in Frankfurt. Then we will talk about investments on the field with Nino Tronchetti Provera, who is here with us at Teatro Sociale. He works in the field of private equity. He started doing so 12 years ago, and he will tell us about that. And then we have Natalie Westerbarkey, who is here with us, who is the director of the Public Policy Europe for Fidelity International. And we have then Gianluca Manca online from Horizon Capital, which is a big investment, the big investment fund of the Banco San Paolo bank. So since it is a very dense agenda that we have, I would like to give the floor to Loriana Pelizzon, and then we start our debate. First and foremost, good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me. It was really a pleasure to be here with us. It is a pleasure. This is a very broad topic, environment and finance. And as you correctly said, there is also the issue of measuring what we consider a green investment or an environmental investment. One aspect that emerged over the past years, actually in the past 15 years, is the idea that we define, as is the case with the credit risk of businesses, the environmental, social and governance rating. So ESG ratings followed suit. They were developed by a number of entities. Some are linked to the classical rating agencies, which work with credit risk, and others which were created to define these types of ratings. Understanding whether the investment meets the environment, social and governance criteria is a first step in thinking that finance can be at least partly directed towards investment projects that can be beneficial for the environment. Unfortunately, though, and this is what I'm going to talk about, and I'm working with the European Investment Bank on this. So if I was saying this type of ratings disagree in a way, and each one has its own definition of a green investment, the effect that you have is a dispersal of the capability of finance to guide investments towards the green world and meet environmental and climate change needs. So it is a squandered opportunity. What I would like to show to you very briefly is linked to the work that we performed and carried out. So we asked ourselves how many rating agencies actually provide ratings for businesses within the context of ESG. We identified these, so it is easy to find their ratings. There are 9 of them, but there are 250 of them in the world. We counted 250. And this makes it clear how difficult it is, as a matter of fact, to have an evaluation and assessment of a certain business in order to understand whether that business meets the criteria in relation to the environment, social aspects and governance. And then we investigated the criteria that these agencies use in order to identify, to find out whether ESG criteria are met by a business. And once again, there are huge discrepancies. It is a very dense and complex table, the one that you're looking at now. But it is clear that the criteria are different, the number of criteria are different, the weighting is different. And as a matter of fact, at the end of the day, by using totally different and completely different methodologies, what happens is that you have from 1 to 100, so bad to, or rather very good, sorry, is 1 and very bad is 100, or vice versa. And then you have also other rating criteria or methods of indicating with AAA, BB, and so on and so forth. Now we have here 4 businesses that were randomly chosen, and here you see the ratings that are given by these businesses, by these entities. Some are rated very low in relation to ESG, while others rate the same entities much better, or something in between, with 50 or 60 point score. And I believe that we have here Nissan Motor, which is considered top with 6 by Sestin Analytics, while it is a triple C for MSCI or 72 for Refinitiv.
If you check the reason why, indeed, Sustainalytics states that indeed Nissan is part of the most polluting industry since they produce cars and vehicles. On the other hand, among automotive companies is the one which is careful to produce environmental friendly cars. That's why they have 6. This is a relative criterion. The others are using absolute criterion. Automotive means pollution, hence they are not very much valuable. I would like to hear the opinion of my colleagues. I think that the criterion should not be included to say don't invest if we really want that funding and finance is helping the environment. This is food for thought. These are just 4 examples. If we just calculate the correlations, we'll see that they are really very different. For the very same type of company, only 20% of them, in the event a company is classified ESG for a rating, is ESG for another. So there is a very strong disagreement there. How can we develop ESG benchmarks, i.e. indexes, to help investors understand that if they invest in a certain portfolio, they will be compatible with ESG? Well, that will depend on the rating agency and the criteria they consider. Since ratings differ also for the same company, here we analyzed 4 indexes as ESG indexes considered by the 4 agencies. Investment funds inspire themselves to assess performances. ETS allowed to directly invest in share portfolios and so on. Well, the different indexes, in the best possible world, if we cross them, we'll see that 60% of companies have the same rating. For others, only 35% of them have the same rating. That means that it will be a dispersion of investments because not all suggest that that is the type of investment to be made to be environmental friendly. What is the impact on performances? Shall we consider the companies where all are agreed? Let's do that. Let's use a common multiplier, the basic common multiplier, and see whether they are agreed. So let's see whether a portfolio is better performant or different from the performances of these agencies consider as very bad ESG companies. Let's see the performances. We split between 2 times creation of ESGs and before. The 2 portfolios simply considered in terms of performance, one is better than the other, but there is no major difference. If we correct by risk factors, we'll see that they have no additional performance. That could be good for investors. If you follow the ESG choice, you won't lose. You'll have the same performances as if you were investing in a different portfolio. You undertake market risks and so on. So in the end, the performances are very like. On the other hand, I can say that the fact that there are many investors choosing such companies has no impact on their prices. So maybe the managers of the companies will not try to meet certain criteria in order to have a certain rating given. There is no major difference by different industries. No differences can be identified in terms of performances. This is my last slide, and then I conclude. The disagreement among different rating agencies is such that, on the one hand, many different benchmarks are identified, so it is difficult for investors to identify a good investment which can meet the minimum standards to think that the money is invested to be environmental friendly. But companies do not have clear indicators to use in order to be greener. So this disagreement is such that, financially speaking, there is no premium factor created, connected with the fact that I invest ESG, so the capital cost is lower than that of a polluting company. And that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much. That was very clear. And maybe if time allows, we can have another round of the table. What you said is very interesting and significant. I browsed through some rankings, and I noted that there is a very big insurance company making sustainable investments, ranking in the highest positions, and in others it's not even classified. We discussed with Professor Cipolletta yesterday. He's seated here in front of us. And he said that in order to have accounting homogeneous principles in balance sheets, it will take a long time. There are major differences between Europe and the other side of the ocean. These assessments are very difficult. I wonder how to assess, and that is many years ago when a Fiat company introduced the first motor-driven 500 car. Marchionni introduced that electric car, and that was in the van. But then in the press conference, he said, I presented it, but don't buy it because it is very expensive for the company. So that is a contrasting assessment. That happened many years ago. Nino Tronchetti Provera, how do you assess your investments? You work in the field of private equity. I won't refer to your biography, but I know that you arrived at sustainable investment just by chance, because you took a challenge when you enrolled into the university, and that became a challenge, and you have been working in the field for 12 years. Tell us something about that. Well, thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here. Yes, I got there just by chance. It was 91. I wanted to enter McKinsey, but that was very difficult. And I wrote a doctoral thesis on the environmental investments. I was then hired by McKinsey. But in 1991, many of the things we are discussing today were not existent. They used a lot of slogans at that time. So it's very difficult to be practical. In 1991, the Kyoto Protocol had not been adopted. The book by Turn on climate change was written 10 years later, and pollution was an issue. Chemistry, heavy industry, these were the issues. So instead of changing the priorities, in the past we concentrated on plastics, now climate change. I started accumulating priorities. Long ago, we had dioxins and chlorine in the rivers. They are still there. So in the end, I realized that human beings, their number is growing. They are consuming more and more. So they consume too many natural resources and pollute too much. That's a major issue, but also a great opportunity for all companies producing the same output while using less inputs. That is, they are resource efficient and they can control pollution. These companies, before being more ethical, will be more performant and make more money with more market shares. That's why my company was founded with that background. So we do not only concentrate on climate change and energy, which is the major problem of those investments. Environmental problems are, which are energy and climate, are indeed very important, but we also have water pollution, earth, waste, air pollution, and so on. Every industry, every sector is different, also in terms of environmental priority. If you move from the first two priorities and go to all priorities, you go from a small number of subsectors, electric cars, renewables, and so on. My first wind structures were made in 2009, but they are just a small part of priority. If you check the numbers, there are many more. And every industry has its own. Packaging means plastics. Agriculture means water. Chemistry means toxicity. So if I can not only improve the footprint of a chemical industry, but if I can produce a water-based paint with a packaging made with materials different from plastics, before being more good, I will grow more. After 12 years, even though we ventured into the sport of private equity and that of GS funds, we have 4 offices in Europe, and for private equity, we are leader in the world. We purchased 38 companies in all industries, all of them European. We had it grow, disseminated it, hired more than 500 people in the past years. This is a growth phenomenon. Is the most important growth trend in the world. And we gave our investors from all over the world, well, 1/3 of them had never invested in Italy. We have offices all over Europe, but headquarters are in Milan. And the financial outcomes indeed shows that we are the best private equity funds in Europe in terms of returns. We did that also in hedge funds. We started with a sustainable fund. After a few months, since we started in a very bad time for capital markets, we are ranking top in the hedge funds ratings. That shows that if you look at the core of things, this is a growing factor. If you look at problems and develop a business strategy, you are very profitable. You selected and bought a company. So what are the criteria you use? Which is the technology that that company had? Well, one of the key problems in the chemical industry is toxicity. So paints and dyes are full of solvents. They are inflammable, very polluting. There was a company in Germany producing water-based paints since 30 years. It used 1% of solvents. It was very performant, used by all furniture manufacturers in Germany. But it was made by a small SME with 40 employees. So there are also dwarf companies in Germany. So they were little known. We bought it, hired managers together with the owners. We developed that. After 5 years, it had customers all over the world, operating in China, the US. And, that were able to sell to IKEA. The size was trebled, and that company could spare the use of 40,000 trucks going per year. Things indeed are much simpler than you are told.
You want safer food, and so food industries are replacing their ingredients and color agents and so on and so forth with natural elements. And the same goes for other sectors. We already bought 7 companies in Europe, 11 factories we have in Europe. And before the COVID, they had a growth of 13% in the food sector, which normally has only 1%. So it is an increasing trend here that we have. Thank you very much. I would like to ask Natalie WESTERBARKEY, representing Fidelity International, which is a gigantic organization which does not work individually with businesses, but works with entire sectors. So I would like to ask you how you address this sector. And since you also have European tasks that you perform also within various committees in Europe for the businesses that manage funds. So I would like to ask you how things are going in Europe and what.
Yeah, thank you so much, and it's such a great honor to be here in person in Trento participating at the festival. So maybe I quickly explain also what Fidelity International has done in order to integrate the ESG factors into our investment and distribution process. So Fidelity has developed its own proprietary ESG rating tool. We completed it last year. And we ranked all of our about 3,500 corporates that we invest in on a scale between A, B, C, D to E. And we have developed about 99 subsectors, so we can benchmark these corporates against each other. And we use the classification of the MSCI. And what was now really interesting is that we observed throughout the last 6 to 9 months since the COVID crisis that we could measure with this own tool really that the corporates that we've ranked highly on ESG that scored well, that they have suffered less losses on average. So it clearly shows that there is a link between what was used to be called non-financial ESG factors and the financial performance, especially with regards to protecting against downside risk. So I believe the ESG wasn't truly new. What is new now is that we have more and more data available and that we can better measure that correlation between non-financial and financial. But what is also important is that the ratings tool that we've developed is not just based on sort of external data providers, but it is very much an in-house, as we are an in-house bottom-up research asset manager and an active asset manager. Our about 200 analysts, they engage regularly with the corporates that we invest in. So they validate the information that we get from external data providers and from the reports that the corporates publish. And they can make their own internal assessments. So going back what the professor presented at the beginning of our session, it's not surprising that we arrive to different scores across different measures or benchmarks, because ultimately what is critical is not just the objective data, but the subjective assessment and valuation of it, the opinion that we form about it. And what is specific to our internal rating system is it's forward-looking. So what we ultimately want is we want to engage with the corporates and to help them transition towards a greener and a more sustainable path in the business activities that they conduct. And I think that's quite important if we want sort of to transform our economy and not just stop investing in certain sectors or certain corporates, but if we want to take the whole, the real economy along with us into this ESG agenda. And what is very helpful at the European level is that, yes, also going back to the presentation from the professor earlier, we didn't used to have a very clear-cut definition on what is ESG. But what is now happening at the policy level, which is very helpful for asset managers and for investor clients, is that the EU has now published their EU taxonomy with a final report in March, and all of that will be now transformed into regulation. And this guides and standardizes more and more what criteria we are supposed to include. And ideally, we would also see some more international coordination on that, which the European Commission is doing and which is helpful. And I think we will come to the international dimension in a second. But what is also important is that we see that the taxonomy isn't just helping us identify what is a green economic activity with regards to climate change mitigation or adaptation, but it also introduces minimum safeguards on the social and governance aspects, because it makes clear reference to the United Nations framework on human rights and the International Labour Organization. So it is an overarching, sustainable policy that guides the asset management industry. And on top of that, of course, what is critical for us is that we allow our clients to give us individual specifications on what is sustainable in their eyes. So we have the minimum standards through the policies, and we have maybe specified additional criteria guided by the preferences of our clients. So we need to not just closely engage with the policymakers and help formulating the framework, but also very closely listen to our clients as to how do they define individually the ESG and what's important to them.
Thank you, Natalie. And now, sì. E ora andiamo a collegarci con Gianluca.
Would like to talk with Gianluca Manca, Head of Sustainability Area of Eudison, which is the Banca Intesa San Paolo Fund. Specifically, I would like to understand a number of things. Clearly, you work with investments in major sectors and big corporates. So tell us about your experience in that respect. But especially, I would like to hear from you about how you consider what is happening in relation to the New Deal and Green Deal, and whether you think that it is really an effective project, efficient project. You also invest heavily in China, so I would like to understand whether you have different policies in Europe and in China vis-à-vis sustainability. Last, I would like to ask you an additional thing, because yesterday Enzo Cipolletta addressed the difficulty of having SMEs also being sustainable. And Tronchetti Provera mentioned the case of a small Germany that was made big thanks to a private equity, an Italian private equity. So I would like to hear from you what you think in that respect and whether you act in that sector, since you are very widespread on the territory. So first and foremost, let me say that going back to what Professor Cipolletta said, what he said is absolutely right. And it took 100 years to reach the Securities Act in 1933, which would compel stocks, the companies listed, to declare a minimum financial statement. It took 100 years. Now it is taken for granted. So we are very active. And in the past 20 years, investors have been very attentive to that, but we are still at the beginning of regulations in a way in that respect. So you asked about Europe. Mrs. Westerbarkey talked about taxonomy earlier on, and that was fundamental because it distinguished between those who work greener than others. But in itself, it is not sufficient to give complete answers, because a corporate can be absolutely exposed to a very green business, but it is very poorly managed and behaves wrongly with its staff. And so it could also be poor in terms of waste management and in the management of secondary materials that it buys. So that is not sufficient. Taxonomy on its own is not sufficient. The European Commission is working so to change this. It is pushing actually so that things are done and are done quickly. So we have now the taxonomy, which is under review in relation to the technical standards, which means in which boxes and certain activities have to be put and how they have to be considered. In addition to that, MIFID should also be mentioned here, which is a series of regulations about transparency also vis-à-vis clients, and then non-financial reporting directive is also to be mentioned, has also to be mentioned here. We have had it in Italy for 3 years now, translating into our own legislation. And then the UCIT funds also are important. We believe that the Commission is working seriously for the European Banking Federation. We worked at analyzing a survey that was made with banks and insurances to understand if and how the financial market accepts new rules in terms of reporting on whom you invested with and how in relation to sustainability. So this survey produced 43 to 44 pages of report for the financial part only, which means that the financial sector is really under pressure. And I believe it was Professor PELIZZON talking about data earlier on. Data are crucial today. They are the very focus in understanding of the reliability and credibility of the Green Deal, because data then are proposed to financial assessors, but data are not homogeneous. So homogeneity of data is one topic. Then the homogeneity of the rating agencies is another topic. If we then go back to what Professor Cipolletta said, we can certainly state that we are still making progress in building the regulations, but we are amid the process. And the EFRAG set up a number of work tables, one chaired by the European Commission, which identifies reporting standards in the non-financial sector for all European entities, and this is to the benefit of those producing and those using those data. The eco-label system of the European Commission, which basically gives a quality label to a series of products which were only consumer products until recently, for instance, in the chemical sector, now is being considered in terms of being given also to financial products, and that would merit the benchmarking activity which lies underneath. So once again, this goes in the direction of the final investor and client in meeting their own wishes. Now, briefly, I would like to go back to what Mr. Tronchetti Provera said. It is true, there are too many slogans. Clearly, when Greta Thunberg organized the Fridays for Future, we were impressed by the media impact that that had. But then, when they started organizing Saturdays for Futures or Sundays for Futures, nobody participated, which means that slogans work until a certain point. Going back to what Natalie said earlier on, we are absolutely aware of the fact that Europe is doing better than many other geographical macro areas, and that will have resonance in the portfolios, because European authorities, on the one hand, are asking European businesses to be transparent and make an effort in that respect, and also in relation to collect sensitive data for a collective assessment. This does not apply to other areas of the world, including the Americas, and clearly funds which invest at international level and also invest significantly in the US will have to invest in businesses which do not meet those criteria that are applicable in Europe. That will make portfolio dishomogeneous, so that we will have the best of the best, meaning those that have been rated better and others which did not question themselves in that respect either, and that could cause problems. And then if we go back and consider what Tronchetti Provera said, I would like to recall the fact that we need air and water.
As for air, last year Italy paid 300 million euro for infringing the PM10 limit in different cities. That means we are not considering long-term sustainability. If trees would be a Wi-Fi station, we would be filled with trees. This activity started in 1996. The first ethical funds were created. I've been working in the group since 1999. So I have seen the development of a number of activities which have been developed also in the Environmental Agency of the United Nations and so on. After the first ethical funds were created, which were a breaking point, recently we started providing different products to meet the most demanding customers who are very sensitive and aware of sustainability. 25% of the Italian share is on our hands. 1 out of 4 is purchased from our group. We have 42 products. And as for pure sustainability product, we have 10 billion invested. We care for all asset under management we have. So the worst in terms of sustainability are subject to a very careful audit. If they are not compliant, they are discarded by our investment opportunities. I think that's all. Thank you very much, Gianluca. Let's go back to Mrs. Pelizzon. We spoke a lot about Europe. Can you tell us something about the policies which are being adopted, about the Green New Deal? Is that better to meet our demands than in the past? And can it be appealing and attract private capital to a sufficient extent? As you said, Europe is a leader on this topic thanks to the document called the Green Deal adopted 2 years ago. Well, it defines 5 key points. One is that of taxonomy, you already mentioned. Then labeling, clear labeling. There is one among the 5 which is very important. That is, how can the banking world be involved in this topic? When we speak about finance in Europe, be it good or bad, I wouldn't say, 70%, as much as 80% of the financial capitals are managed by banks in the form of loans and so on. So asset management is very important here. If we want to have a real impact on the future in Europe, we have to involve the banks. And the legislators decided to try and test and assess to see whether it's possible to limit capital requirements in terms of funds given by banks in the forms of loans to those companies who will do green investments. That is a very sensitive subject, and there is a long discussion on that. Some say that we should not limit the capital requirements. We should increase the price for brown investments. If we speak about the risk of climate change, banks will need even more capitals as compared with the one they have, considering not only financial and credit risks, but also the impact of climate change. We also have to see what can be the form of incentives to banks so that loans are facilitated to support green projects. We have to be sure that, on the one hand, financial stability is not damaged, and that the risks undertaken by banks are guaranteed by capitals. That's a key topic. There is a long discussion on that. I think it would be worth, and let me say that I really appreciated the comments by Mr. Tronchetti Provera. It's important to assess the merit of things and see what can really be done and what the impact that we really can have while changing, for example, the way we manufacture paints, to have a wider view to the world, reconciling that with the issue of the financial risks of such investments. Another key topic is that of real estate, i.e. all the grants are given to energy efficiency buildings, the loans given there. It will be interesting to see whether funding the building construction or refurbishing buildings, that will imply lowering the cost of heating and so on, to see whether that it could be good. And let me tell you that 60 banks are working with us to define a criterion to assess energy efficiency of the different buildings, and to provide that piece of information, and there we go on data, to put that in the bank databases, so that when they calculate credit scoring, they could consider the economic benefits deriving from an energy efficient building. Thank you very much. Now, second round with very short comments. Congratulations on your success. How comes that other major groups or big names like Al Gore or Branson working in the private equity sector have abandoned that? What about it? Was that a problem of ideology or not being skilled? And then a curiosity. You invest in Venki. You invest in Venki. Wonderful chocolate. I am one of the founders of Venki. They produce wonderful chocolate. Well, quality is good, but what is the purpose of that? Well, chocolate is very healthy, but that has nothing to do with my job. I'm one of the founders of that company. Well, I go back from the start. Behind the fog, we have a lot of meat, if I may, and this is changing the economy. Many winners of the past will be losers, or they already are, and we'll have winners who are not even present. And that is going slowly, but in 1991 it was faster to talk about the sectors and the industries which are already involved. Now it's very difficult to tell who are not involved, but there are problems. Flower power, environmentalisms, the empty slogans, where there are not many engineers. If you talk with an engineer, they say the ethanol in Brazil is very good because sugar beet is born from the ground. If you have to invest to plant wheat or maize in the US, the energy balance is negative. So Al Gore is part of flower power. Now, well, he did well, but as for public equity, well, they did very well. So together with us, in the field of private equity, we also do public equity. Maybe they are the best. But for the private, well, they follow the ideology of flower power, Richard Branson and others. In Italy, we saw that happened. There are no incinerators in the south and center of Italy. Engineers, well, when faced with a problem, they try to look for the best of solution. We read newspapers. It appears that hydrogen is like holy water. Engineers do have solution. We have also another problem, that of compliance. You mentioned that taxonomy and so on. I do understand you because I fight with people like you every day. But frankly speaking, we have APG and the major investors in the world, and they have ESG questionnaires, which are very long. Unfortunately, the bad ones, the nasty ones, the real polluters who make a lot of money, not willing to change their business model, and that is a mistake. They are investing a lot of money to be formally perfect. As a consequence of that, ESG ETF, the most important sustainable product in the world, the first 5 stocks are Total and IP, which indeed is not the stock that a potential investor would invest if they want to stick to ESG. But the main problem is that environmental topics, starting from climate change and so on, are growing as compared with the 90s when I got started. That's a major issue for us, our children, and so on. The very good news is that in 1991, I was considered bizarre. Now, major investors in Korea, Australia, funds, insurance companies, well, they all want to invest in that. So those capitals, indeed, find it difficult to put the feet on the ground, but the speed of action, well, it will be difficult to catch up with the speed of problems. Net zero 2050 is impossible, and that will have lots of consequences on our health. I conclude by saying that remember that this is business, to make money. If you don't make money, finance will not get there because they will have to pay insurance, pensions. They are forced to make money. Thank you very much, Nino. We've been rather good with the timing. I would like to give the floor to Nathalie for some final conclusions. Nathalie has a long experience in the field of fidelity, and she also participated in many public discussions on the support to public investments by the financial world. This afternoon, we'll have our Prime Minister, Mr. Conte, will have a dialogue with Tito Boeri. I'm sure they will speak about recovery fund and the investments we'll have that with the money from Europe and to be integrated by the private sector. So my question is, based on your experience as Fidelity, have you seen something that might suggest an innovative route to integrate private investment and those of...
Thank you so much. So,
Grazie.
a couple of innovative ways to integrate this going forward. First, the EU Recovery Fund, which puts the European Green Deal at the core, is a major milestone, and I think that will foster public-private partnerships via the European Investment Bank, and hopefully there will be a close collaboration between the asset management industry, maybe also through our industry association, IFAMA, to explore how capital from our clients can flow via us into these projects across Europe. But it is much wider than that, because Europe, obviously we're only one region, and we see that the majority of pollution come from other parts of the world. So what is really important and critical is that we look at it at the international level. And it's great that the European Commission is doing a lot of effort for international coordination. It has a platform that includes China and India and a couple of other large countries around the globe. But there's another very important initiative, which is with the G20, the OECD. So they have just published a report on infrastructure investments in collaboration with asset managers. And they were building sort of on the Japanese presidency in 2019, who had already issued some principles on quality infrastructure investments. And this year, under the presidency of Saudi Arabia, they engaged with asset managers to identify what should be the guiding criteria for asset managers, especially to get involved. And one of the things we're very happy they included is that infrastructure investments should consider the sustainable criteria, because it's not just about building infrastructure that mitigates the climate change risk, but also that is climate change adaptation fit in terms of resilience against extreme weather events, for example, which we need to, when we put the capital into these infrastructure projects, we want to make sure they're there for the long term. So I think the opportunity, especially for Italy, who in 2021 will have the G20 presidency, to move these principles forward and implement them in practice and continue collaborate with asset managers on them. So to really make sure, how do we identify that actual money flows into these projects, not just in Europe, but I think that is worldwide, because if we really want to resolve the climate change challenge, and we have the European Parliament who has declared the climate emergency and some other countries around the globe, then we need to act also with a sense of urgency. And perhaps next year, together with the EU Recovery Fund becoming operational from 1st of January, the fact that Italy will have the G20 presidency and we have these principles of sustainable infrastructure at the G20 level now, let's just make it happen soon.
Thank you, Natalie. Con questo riferimento appunto
Thank you very much, Natalie. And this really will continue as a debate in the afternoon. We will talk about the G20 presidency of Italy next year. Thank you very much for your attention. Tomorrow we will have the third forum on sustainability and the environment, and we will talk about new technologies especially. Thank you very much for your attention.